Zuraida Dada, From Cradle to Grave, Apartheid as a Political Socioeconomic Strategy. This video is part of a conversation between Sandra Collins and Zuraida Dada. In this video, Sandra asked the following question. What was it like for you to grow up under apartheid? From the insider-outsider perspective of having more privilege than your Black allies, and yet still being excluded and oppressed as a person of color.
I want to start off by speaking about what apartheid was, because a lot of people don't know. Like, they'll think about apartheid as a system of racism, but it was actually much bigger and much broader than that. It'll make more sense in terms of the experiences that I had. So apartheid was a system that was a socioeconomic and political in nature. So it was not just political, it was also a socioeconomic. And apartheid actually started with the Afrikaner government, but the first forays into racism and legislative racism actually started in 1912 with the Land Act, which started taking away land from indigenous peoples. And when I say indigenous people, I mean Black ethnic people, and started taking over their lands and forcibly removing them and pushing them into these Bantustans. So it started there, but the actual formalization of apartheid was with the apartheid government in the 1940s. In my early experiences of apartheid growing up, I always remember us being separated from other people. Like, we were always only with our own people, with Indians. They started reconfiguring cities or towns in the following way. So, Afrikaners use the kraal system. A kraal is a circle of wagons that they used to use in order to protect themselves. So, when they sleep at night, it's a circle, and a circle gives you 360 vantage point, 360-degree vantage point. So they would have their children, their ammunition, their women in the center of the circle, and the wagons would act as protection for them. So they did the same thing in our cities. And I didn't know this until I went to university and studied industrial sociology. So there was a direct intentionality behind creating the cities in such a way that the white people and the CBD, the Central Business District, would be in the center of the cities with the white area surrounding it. There is a method to this madness, and that's what makes apartheid so evil and so malevolent. If you situate white people around the center of the city closest to the CBD, then you only have to bring in infrastructure for them, which is infrastructure that goes just from the CBD to the home, which is like about a 10-minute drive. In some instances, you only have to have water for a short distance. You only have to have, all the infrastructure, necessary infrastructure, plumbing and electricity just for that community. But it was a little bit more malevolent than that. We all used to live together. Everybody used to live together before apartheid. My grandparents, for example, had businesses in the CBD. My grandmother had a cafe that she was running in the CBD, and they came and they just bulldozed it all. And then they forced us, forcible removals, to move, because my grandmother used to live on top of the store, right? And they weren't compensated. Up to today, we've never been compensated for these losses that we've experienced financially. And then they moved us into these concentric circles of suburbs that were along racial lines. So the white people were in this concentric circle in front, closest to the CBD. Then around the CBD, you have, for example, the colored people. And in South Africa, coloreds refers to offspring of white and black, right? So they were around that. And then around that, on the outer perimeter, were Indians, right? And then beyond that were Black people. Especially with the Black area and even with the Indian area, there was only one entrance and one exit. road that led to that. And the roads were obviously not very well done because, you know, the apartheid government was only focused on white people. And so the more they could alienate us, the better, right? So they didn't have to take care of us. Another reason why they did that, why there was only one entrance and one exit, and the reason why they also put Black people on the extreme, perimeter of it, is because if ever there was an uprising, they'd have to first go through the Indian community and then they'd have to go through the colored community. So by the time they reach the white community, all of our communities act as security, you know, and, um, and as an alarm to say, okay, you know what, now something's happening. They can stop people, right? If it's just one exit and one entrance, right? Now you can cordon that off and now people are stuck. So in understanding that it was, you know, that economic, it was also social, right? In terms of apartheid, which means apart, being apart, right? And also there was a job reservation system. My parents couldn't go to school beyond the age, you know, beyond elementary school. It was illegal for them to be able to go to school. So my mother had to learn how to become uh, um, um, a midwife through the Holy Cross and very clandestinely. And my mother remains, and you know, my mother's passed, but she still remains the first and only Indian woman to be a midwife. And so she used to serve as the Black communities as well because there wasn't access to facilities, right? Apartheid governed our whole life, like from cradle to grave. We weren't allowed to work in white facilities. We were restricted in terms of, like, my parents were restricted in terms of getting an education. So they had to become very, very entrepreneurial and, creative in terms of what they did. For me, myself, we had to fundraise at school in order to get money to build a new school from our own community because there was no funding. We had to apply to university to get permission from the Minister of Education to allow us to be able to study at university. So those were what happened to us. But I believe that the intention of apartheid was to break the family system down. You can tell a healthy society by how healthy the family structure is. First, what they did is they put people in the Bantustans. And those Bantustans did not have the proper infrastructure. They did not have good farming lands, those kind of things. So people started starving. And so as a result, people needed to find work to feed their families. And so what they had to do was they were forced to come into the city and to work in the mines, for example, like in Johannesburg. And so then what we had was a migrant labor system. And so that started breaking down the family structure. And even for us, in terms of making a choice about how involved we were going to be in the anti-apartheid movement, it created a lot of schisms in families. Because some people in the family would say, yes, I'm going to do this, and other people would say, no, you can't because you're going to die. We had the same thing happen even in our own family about these discussions. And I remember always arguments, and my father was very afraid for my sister because my sister was very, very active in the anti-apartheid movement. So yeah, it really, really created a divide. And they used very much a divide and conquer strategy in order to be able to keep us, fearful and to keep us subdued so that we would do whatever they wanted us to do. Mandela and Winnie Mandela were all banned individuals. And what banned individuals means is that they weren't allowed to speak in public. So I remember when I used to go to university and I used to sit in classes, Winnie would sit in the front pew with her bodyguards. She never uttered a word, which was so tragic, right? Like this woman who had so much of knowledge about what was happening about apartheid, and she couldn't say a thing. She was banned. And what that meant was that if she said something, she'd be jailed. But the first time I had a consciousness of what apartheid was and who Nelson Mandela was was one time my sister had paraphernalia of Mandela, and if you were found with paraphernalia of Mandela, you would be jailed, right? Like, I mean, we're talking about this is an act of treason. And you know, I think people need to understand that apartheid was a legal dispensation, which means that we could go to jail for treason. Many people were killed and tried for treason. Like, this is treason. Like, you know, we're not talking about just having an opinion, you know, against the government. We're talking about, you know, treason. There was capital punishment, like you could be hanged, you know, shot for treason. So the first time I understood who Nelson Mandela was when my sister had a T-shirt with his name on it. And my father was livid. My mother was so upset. She was crying, you know, and I couldn't understand that. I couldn't understand, like, what is this ruckus about? And so afterwards, I started realizing, oh, we're not supposed to have that, because if we have that, it would be treasonous. My father used to go to London, and one of my father's family members was a part of the anti-apartheid movement and was in exile, like, you know, out of the country. And so my father used to visit, and when my father used to visit, he would come back and he would tell us stories about, you know, how they would, interrogate him when he came back. Because obviously, all these people who were in exile, you know, their homes were under surveillance. I'm coming back to that point of the first time I experienced the consciousness about this was also when I was at school, and you know, my teachers would say that you know, they are on strike today, and chalk downs, you know, sit-in. They would do stage protests like sit-ins, because you know they learned a lot about that from Mahatma Gandhi, because Mahatma Gandhi had a big influence on the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, especially amongst the Indian people. I remember going to school, and the teachers would say, you need to sit down, you need to sit down on the grass. The police are going to come. Don't do anything, just sit down. That's when I started realizing, oh my God, like, this is something big. You know, you can become so insular when you're living in your own, you know, environment. And, you know, especially since there's no diversity and there's only people like you. So, you know, there's no diversity of thought either. And so when that started happening, that's when I started realizing, oh my God, like, this is serious. And, you know, this is life and death stuff. When I went to Johannesburg to study at university, there were only a certain number of seats that were available to us at university. So we had to compete, you know, for like very few seats for people of color, whereas white people, they could have as many seats as they wanted in a particular class. Growing up under apartheid in school also meant that we didn't get the best education, because the government wasn't interested in providing us with funding, and we could only have Indian teachers in our schools, because that was the legal requirement. And so teachers would not want to come all the way down from Durban all the way up to my hometown in Polokwane to come and teach. So, and we had to actually be self-taught, you know, and the level of education we received, it wasn't at the same level as white people. I've had experiences under apartheid where I went to a restaurant, for example, and you know, I was turned away because I wasn't white. I've got a sister who married a white man, and you know, it was completely, like, it wasn't allowed, it's illegal. And what's interesting about that is that my sister was the one who was impacted, because there's no punishment for the white person for being involved with somebody who's non-white. All the punishment sits with the non-white person. Yes, and even cemeteries were divided, right? In terms of color, the cemeteries are still divided. So, you know, people are buried in cemeteries that are divided along color lines.